Whether you're into comedians roasting each other's life choices or turning yesterday's bad decisions into today's funny stories, Amazon Music's got the most ad-free top podcasts, included with Prime. Download the Amazon Music app and get in on the joke. Or go to amazon.com/ad-free-comedy. That's amazon.com/ad-free-comedy to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Attention sports enthusiasts, keep the adrenaline pumping and elevate your game day with Chumba Casino. It's completely free to play. No purchase necessary. Whether you're cheering from the stands, on the move, or relaxing at home, Chumba Casino brings the thrill of social casino directly to your fingertips. Experience the ultimate social casino adventure with reels of casino-style games, offering hundreds of exciting options to choose from and fresh new releases every week. There's always something new and thrilling to explore. From action-packed social slots and classic blackjack to engaging bingo and solitaire, the fun never stops. Plus, enjoy generous daily login bonuses and a fantastic free welcome bonus to kickstart your social gaming journey. Dive into the excitement, discover a world where you can play for your chance to redeem some serious prizes, and have a blast along the way. Don't miss out. What are you waiting for? Join now and immerse yourself in nonstop fun and adventure with Chumba Casino. Get in on the action today at ChumbaCasino.com and make every day a Chumba day. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ TNC supply.
You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings,
and
Killer Communications.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together, we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Today we're discussing the distressing missing persons case of Amber Lynn Wilde. In September of 1998, 19-year-old Amber was living in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and she was about 4.5 months pregnant. On Wednesday, September 23rd, she vanished. But let's give a little backstory. Amber and her sister were raised by single dad Steve Wilde in Campbellsport, Fond du Lac County, Wisconsin. Her mother is Julie Ketter. Amber graduated from Campbellsport High School in 1997, where she was a driven student who aspired to be a pediatrician. After high school, she pursued that dream by taking classes at community college and then transferring to the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay, where in the fall of 1998 she was a junior. Amber lived alone in an apartment near the campus that she moved into about 3 weeks before she vanished. When Amber found herself pregnant, she confided in her aunt and godmother, Lori, and then eventually in the rest of the family, including her dad, Steve. She told them the father of her baby was a 6'5" tall construction worker she had met at a party in May of 1998 named Matthew Schneider. But Matthew was engaged to someone else, a woman named Heidi. According to an entry in Amber's diary and what she told Aunt Lori, Matthew was not happy about the baby and did not want his fiancée to find out about it. He pressured Amber to abort the baby, but Amber wanted to keep it, and her family had agreed to care for it so she could remain in school. Amber also wanted her baby to have an involved father, so after trying repeatedly to convince Matthew to be a part of their baby's life, Amber confronted his fiancée Heidi and also wrote a letter to Matthew's mother, telling both of them that she was pregnant with Matthew's child. Amber wrote in her diary that Matthew was really angry about this. It's unclear how much contact the two, Amber and Matthew, had over the next few weeks. Then on Wednesday, September 23, 1998, Amber got into a fender bender in which she rear-ended someone and hit her head on the windshield. Suffering from a headache, she was diagnosed by the University of Wisconsin Green Bay medical staff with a likely concussion. She went back to her apartment, located in the 2000 block of August Street in Green Bay, and her father, Steve, called and checked on her throughout the day to make sure she was okay. The last call between Steve and Amber took place at 7:16 p.m. that evening, when Amber called him from the landline in her apartment. The next day, Steve repeatedly tried to reach Amber, but she never answered her phone. Amber also did not show up for her 1 o'clock class, and she failed to show up for an optometrist appointment she had that day. Steve, very worried about his daughter, drove the 90 minutes to her apartment and used his key to enter. No one was there, and nothing seemed amiss. He noted Amber's car was also missing, but calls to her cell phone went unanswered. Steve reported Amber missing to the Green Bay Police Department on September 25th. More than a week after Amber was last seen, on October 1st, her silver 1988 Subaru GL was located abandoned in the parking lot of the 50-yard line sports bar and Road Star Inn on the south side of the Lombardi Access Road near Lambeau Field, where the Green Bay Packers play. The car was unlocked. Amber's purse was in the trunk and the keys in the ignition. And Amber's cell phone was plugged into the cigarette lighter charger thingy, which was how she typically kept it. Witnesses told police the car had possibly been there since September 28th, but no one had seen who had driven it to where it was found. Police noted that the driver's seat was pushed all the way back, whereas Amber, who was 5'5", drove with the seat pretty far forward so she could reach the pedals. Crime Watch Daily reported, quote, "Just 2 days before Amber went missing, she had her car serviced, and they wrote down the mileage on her odometer. When Amber's car is found at Lambeau Field, Steve notices about 900 new, unexplained miles," end quote. Steve Wilde gave detectives access to Amber's apartment, in which they located her diary. The diary spelled out her relationship with Matthew Schneider. They used witness interviews and phone records to corroborate the diary entries' dates and statements, such as that Amber was indeed pregnant, that she met Schneider at a party hosted by a guy named John in May of 1998, and that the two spoke on the phone or communicated more than 60 times since that date. Police searched high and low for Amber, but they failed to find any trace of her. There was no useful physical evidence located in her car or apartment, but for some unidentified prints in the vehicle that remain unidentified to this day. Unable to find Amber, police interviewed Matthew Schneider, and he denied it all. He denied having a relationship with Amber. He said he'd met her maybe twice when she was working at a restaurant. He certainly had never had sex with her. According to police documents, he exhibited zero concern about the missing pregnant teen. His fiancée, Heidi, in a separate interview, told investigators that the relationship, in air quotes, between Matthew and Amber was a figment of the teen's imagination. She was obsessed with and harassing Matthew, and she had made everything up out of whole cloth. Well, Amber's diary said otherwise. It detailed an intense, highly sexualized relationship between Amber and Matthew that endured for 4 months and ended abruptly with her sharing the news of her pregnancy with Matthew. Unfortunately, Matthew Schneider has lawyered up and has refused to speak further with police since October of 1998. Police stated publicly that they had a person of interest in Amber's disappearance, but they did not name him at that time. The following was reported by the Green Bay Press-Gazette, quote, "Since she disappeared, she never again used her credit card or touched her bank account. No calls were made on her cell phone or on the landline that kept her connected with family in Mayville, where her father lived, and in Campbellsport, where she had gone to high school. Even if she had time to meet people in the 3 weeks since she arrived in Green Bay, she didn't hang out in bars or run with a rough crowd, end quote. Extensive searches were conducted for Amber. Crime Watch Daily reported, quote, search warrants reveal police have conducted multiple digs along Highway 29 and a massive search on the Schneider family farm, all in an effort to find Amber's body, end quote. From the Green Bay Press-Gazette, quote, detectives brought in an underwater camera and a cadaver-detecting dog to search the property, which has at least one pond, a police official said. The property is owned by a relative of a person who knew Wilde, an official said. In 2013, Green Bay police detectives Lee Kingston and David Graff took over the Amber Wilde case. They started reviewing the case file and considering what avenues of investigation remained open to them. In 2015, Heidi Schneider was arrested on retail theft and other charges. Her jailhouse phone calls to her husband, Matthew Schneider, were documented, and therefore police learned what cell phone number Schneider was using. So, in 2015, police filed subpoenas for 38-year-old Matthew Schneider's phone records. These were not for phone records dating back to the time of the disappearance in 1998. Police knew plenty about those. This from Crime Watch Daily, quote, between the time period Matthew and Amber first met to the time period Amber went missing, from phone records and other statements, they spoke maybe around 60 times, said Detective Graff. There clearly was a back and forth going on, documented very well through phone records and a diary that Amber kept, end quote. The cops were able to cross-reference the dates and times with Amber's diary and phone records to roughly determine the content of each call. Quote, most of the conversations, to our knowledge, were about Amber being pregnant, and then once she was missing, there was never phone contact since, said Detective Graff. The court filings relating to the police records subpoena were released to the public in 2016, and they revealed that Matthew Schneider was considered a suspect in Amber Wilde's homicide, and police believed the phone records would be evidence of that. The investigators wanted evidence of Matthew Schneider's continued regular contact with a man named Nick Pettit. The court documents named Pettit as a person of interest and a suspected accomplice of Schneider's. What was Nick Pettit's connection? Well, in 1998, when Amber vanished, Nick Pettit and Matthew Schneider were working together as surveyors on the Wisconsin Department of Transportation State Route 29 upgrade project. When investigators came to his job site and questioned him, Matthew Schneider told detectives to speak with his friend Nick Pettit. Pettit told the investigators that his girlfriend had seen Amber driving her silver Subaru in Wausau, Wisconsin. The girlfriend was able to give a very detailed description of the car, including stuffed animals and bumper stickers. This was 90 miles away from Green Bay. Photos of Amber's car had not been released publicly, so it was apparent that Pettit and or his girlfriend did in fact know what Amber's car looked like. Police believed this quote-unquote sighting of Amber and her car was an attempt to make it appear that Amber had left on her own. Pettit told police that his friend Matthew Schneider had an alibi for the night Amber went missing, September 23rd, 1998. Schneider had told him that after work that day, he had dinner and went to a movie alone. Of course, no one could verify this alibi, and I'm doing all the air quotes. Further, Pettit did not have an alibi either. In an October 1998 interview, Pettit's girlfriend, who subsequently became his wife, told police that Pettit had come home at 6 p.m. after working all day. But, as reported by the Green Bay Press-Gazette, quote, a year later, in a John Doe hearing held in Brown County Circuit Court, Pettit and his girlfriend both testified Pettit was not home that evening, and the girlfriend had made several phone calls to try to find out where he was, end quote. Pettit was required to testify at this John Doe hearing, and he told the judge that he could not remember what he did that night and that he most likely was not home. So, Nick Pettit did not have an alibi for the night on which Amber was missing. This was important because police believed he had assisted in disposing of Amber's body. When questioned in 2014 about Matthew Schneider and Amber, according to the Green Bay Press-Gazette, quote, Pettit told investigators he was not close to Schneider and had in fact only known him a couple of months when they worked together in 1998, end quote. But police learned from Heidi Schneider that in fact Matthew and Nick had known each other for years. They were best friends, and Pettit had served as an usher in their 2000 wedding. Police believed that Pettit and Schneider remained close, and Pettit had lied about his connections to Schneider. They subpoenaed Pettit's phone records to show that the two men were, quote, constant companions. The search warrant, written by seasoned Green Bay detective David Graff, who is our guest today, states that Detective Graff, quote, believes that such phone records can show that Pettit and Schneider are still in collusion with each other in reference to the crime. The subpoenas and underlying affidavits make clear that police consider Matthew Schneider a suspect in the presumed homicide of Amber Wilde and her baby, and he has been the only suspect since Amber's disappearance. Detective Graff's subpoena for the phone records states, quote, it is believed that Amber Wilde is in fact deceased under suspicious circumstances, end quote, and that the records, quote, constitute evidence of first-degree intentional homicide. When last questioned in October of 1998, Matthew Schneider refused to provide an alibi for his whereabouts on September 23, 1998. His then-fiancée Heidi testified at the John Doe hearing in 1999 that she couldn't remember where Schneider told her he was on the night of September 23rd, the year before. Schneider has not spoken to police since that October 1998 interview, and he has refused to take a polygraph. After declining a proffer extended by Brown County District Attorney David Lassie, Nick Pettit has also stopped speaking with police and has also declined to take a polygraph. So where's Amber? Crime Watch Daily says, quote, when 19-year-old Amber Wilde mysteriously went missing, State Highway 29, that runs through the heart of Green Bay, Wisconsin, was under major construction. The police and Amber's family think she and her unborn baby are buried somewhere under all that asphalt. Matthew Schneider, the alleged father of Amber Wilde's unborn baby, was building Highway 29 when Amber was last seen alive, end quote. Did you get that? That's the reason for all the searches along Highway 29. Police theorized that Schneider and an accomplice hid her body somewhere along the road project, perhaps even burying it under the new highway. Unfortunately, despite rigorous searches, no evidence of Amber was found along Highway 29 or on the Schneider family property. Years passed. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit reviewed the case in 2017. In 2020, Heidi Schneider gave an interview to Northeast Wisconsin's NBC 26. She said she and Matthew Schneider were high school sweethearts and had been married for 20 years at the time of the interview. She said he was unfairly targeted, and she would not stay with him if she thought he did something. She also said her heart breaks for Amber's family and for her and Matthew's family. She told the reporter about her and her husband's discussion of the case. Quote, we've talked about it over the years. It's absolutely been a cross to bear. So what's the status of the investigation now? Detective Graff retired from the Green Bay Police Department, but 2 Green Bay detectives continue to work the case and explore every possible angle to solve it. Fingerprints collected from Amber's vehicle have been entered into APHIS, which constantly searches for a match. The 25th anniversary of Amber's disappearance came and went in 2023. She and her baby have been missing for 27 years. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Amber and her child, please contact the Green Bay Police Department. David Graff, the now retired detective who took over Amber's case in 2013, sat down with Mike Morford to talk about the mysterious disappearance of Amber Wilde. That conversation is coming up after a word from our sponsors.
I want to thank retired investigator David Graff, and he's here to talk about the Amber Wilde case, which is a complicated one. There's a lot of moving parts, so somebody like yourself can really add to the conversation and let listeners know more about the case and help us understand it. Before we dive into what happened and what we know, what we don't know, can you just tell listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to be involved in the case?
Well, I just recently retired last year from the Green Bay, Wisconsin Police Department. I was there for about 28 years, and prior to that, I was an officer in another jurisdiction. Majority of my career, about 15 years, I spent as an investigator in Green Bay. And I started off working like the evening shift at night as a detective, and sometimes when it gets slow, I went to what we call our cold case files. It's just a bunch of cabinets at the time with paperwork in it, and I came across Amber's case, so I just started reading up with it. And then years later, one of our captains decided to take a look at all of our cold cases and reassign them, and then I took on the Amber Wilde case along with another detective.
And how long total would you say you were working that?
I think I started working on the case in approximately 2012.
Okay. I'm curious. I always like to get a layout of the land in that area. What is the crime rate like, and are there a lot of missing persons cases, and how often do they go unsolved?
Well, we're a smaller size city, about 100,000 people, and overall, our crime rate is lower than the national average. In fact, I believe it's been voted one of the best places to live in the country at some point in time. I am aware of at least 3 to 4 other missing person cases, and then we do have one unsolved homicide from 1988 that has not been solved yet.
So it seems like there's a pretty good solve rate and not much crime to begin with if you're lower than the national average.
Yeah, in Green Bay, well, lately we've been averaging in terms of homicides, like I would say to 3 to 5 a year, but our success rate is pretty much over 90% on that. In fact, I think of all the ones that I've been involved in within the last 15 years, I think there's one that hasn't been made an arrest, and that's not including the one from 1988. But I know we started working on that one, and they have a suspect and everything. They're just coming up with some more information. So yes, overall, our solve rate is probably as close as 100 as you can get.
And I'm curious too, when you take over a cold case, especially maybe a missing persons case, what are some of the challenges you face going into that, and how hard is it being, obviously not a real fresh case, but also, you've maybe not a lot to go on. How do you work around that, and what are your challenges and things you try to do in that kind of case?
Well, first thing I like to do is do a deep dive into the case itself, which means looking into the case file. In this Amber's case, basically it was a bunch of boxes with papers in it. So myself and my partner had to go through and organize everything. And eventually we had it all digitized into our records database. And so just organizing all that takes it takes quite a bit, but then also figuring out what has been done, what hasn't been done, what could we do over again, and just coming up with a plan. We did big dive into the evidence that was in the case, trying to determine if any evidence worth pursuing further testing or any type of avenues that we could think of. Any persons that we identified that really hadn't been interviewed properly. So we identified several of those, and it's just coming up with a plan. Looking at the evidence, determining, if there's people out there that we still need to interview, or for our purposes to get caught up with the case, to re-interview, even though it's had been several years since they were last interviewed.
And I know you didn't know her, and so you have to get to know her through these files and through talking to people and witnesses. Can you tell us a little bit about Amber and what you have learned, about her life and who she was and what was going on up at the time she went missing?
Yeah, she comes from a very loving family, and I've spoken to her father, her aunt, her grandmother, who are all passionately trying to find out what happened to Amber. And she was just from what I've been told, a bright young lady. She had graduated early from the local technical school where she was living at the time in the West Bend area, and she moved up to Green Bay to pursue her bachelor's degree, and was very smart, and very active in trying to being involved on campus. I mean, she wasn't on campus for very long, but she'd gotten elected to, I believe, the student council, and was really just a person who everybody loved and just was full of life and ready to have an incredible future.
And nothing in her history that would put her maybe more at risk than some people, anything that would be a foreshadowing that something like this could happen to her?
No.
Mm. Can you give just a general overview or a general synopsis of the circumstances surrounding her disappearance?
Yeah, it was basically, it was on September 23rd is the last known contact that anybody had with Amber. And that mostly consisted of contact with her father by phone. She had actually been involved in a traffic accident earlier in the day. So she had contact with the father regarding that. And she also had some contact with the person that she had been in an accident with, going over, who's to pay for what and such. Um, she did tell her father that she had bumped her head during the accident, so she asked him to call her the next day. And he did, and he couldn't get a hold of her. Tried calling numerous times and couldn't get a hold of her. Eventually did come up to Green Bay, where she was living, and went into her apartment, and she wasn't in her apartment, but her car was missing. And so he called the IUWGB, had them check for classes. She hadn't been seen recently on campus. At one point, he did contact the police department and by phone. And, at that time, it's like she's an adult. It had only been, I think, a day at that time, give her a little bit time before reported missing, which is not uncommon back then. It's different now. We do tend to take these seriously right away. But it was on the 25th is when he actually came to the Green Bay Police Department and formally reported her as missing. And heard from her, which is very unusual because she pretty much talked to him every day. And, the car being gone was also unusual. And so he reported her as missing.
And how quickly did the investigation begin? I mean, how fast do you guys jump into action and start trying to find a missing person?
Well, I know that the initial detective started working on it fairly quickly. He did a typical calling around to local hospitals and in jails to see if, she was hurt or for some reason had gotten herself arrested. Talking to the family and following up some of the last people that she might have had contact with, either in the area here or down where she was living. So they took it up pretty quickly.
Was there anything that jumped out? Was there anything that they were able to find or, something that was alarming or troubling or maybe would point them in the right direction?
One of the things the family didn't mention was a young man. One of the things they mentioned first was that Amber was pregnant at the time she went missing. And the family had suspected there was a certain young man who Amber had told everybody was the father of her child. However, he wasn't very receptive to that fact. So there was some concern on the family on that part, which then caused one of our detectives to go and try to interview that young man.
Was he cooperative?
Long or short of it, not really, no. They went and visited him at his work site. He denied knowing Amber, denied causing the pregnancy. And then when they tried to interview him again, he basically got a lawyer and refused to talk anymore.
That's going to be tough when you have somebody that might have some information and they don't want to cooperate. And I've read stats that pregnant women are often, there's a high rate of violence towards them, sometimes by partners or, the fact that she was pregnant was interesting. Um, so were you able to establish an alibi for him, even though he wasn't cooperative for the time she was missing?
Not really. His alibi through other people was that I think he told his buddy that he went to see a movie that night by himself. But then he told his parents that he went and bought some cigarettes or got some money out of an ATM machine, maybe went to the mall. So there was no real specific alibi on his part. It was mostly, and he never provided one to us that can recall, but he did, provide somewhat of an alibi through a friend of his at the time that he's working with and through his parents.
So as this investigation starts to unfold, you don't have his cooperation. What things were you able to turn up or learn? Were there any details that were able to come to light early on?
Well, one of the things that in the office, the initial investigators did was, subpoena for Amber's phone records. She did have a cell phone, but this is way before there was texting or even location data like we have now. Basically, you can just kind of get what towers that she might have used. So they did quite an extensive workup of, her phone calls, who she was talking to in the time period up to she went missing, who she's last had contact with. And one of the major developments that occurred was about 10 days after she was reporting missing. I believe it was October 1st when her vehicle was found in a parking lot of a hotel, actually just across the street from Lambeau Field here in Green Bay. The vehicle appeared to be abandoned. The keys were in it. Her purse was in it. Her phone was in it. But no Amber.
And I assume that the car was processed to try and find evidence, signs of maybe who drove it. Was anything of value gained with searching the car?
It was searched extensively, not only by our Wisconsin crime lab, but actually eventually by the FBI. And lots of evidence was developed, lots of evidence was tested, but nothing that could pinpoint as to who had been in the car just prior to it being dropped off. The one thing that the family was suspicious about was Amber was short in stature, and when her vehicle was found, the driver's seat was all the way back, which they said she drove always with the vehicle with her seat all the way forward so she could touch the pedals. So they felt that unusual, and it indicated to us that it's possible then that somebody besides Amber had actually dropped off that vehicle at that location. But it's been extensively analyzed, and lots of evidence was covered. But like I said, nothing to point to another person at this time.
And I know it seems like today there's surveillance cameras all over the place. Was there any kind of surveillance of that area back then?
No, there wasn't.
Mm. And were there any eyewitnesses to maybe who had parked the car there or when the car had been parked there?
Well, they talked to several of the employees there and some people in the neighborhood, and it looked like it had been parked there a couple days prior to us discovering it. But no one reported seeing anybody exiting the vehicle or the vehicle arriving. It was more like they noticed it that it had been parked there for maybe a couple days before we reported it, we found it.
So it seems like a populated area that if somebody was trying to hide it, they probably wouldn't have hidden it there because they would assume that's going to be found. So
Yeah.
any thoughts about that? Like if somebody was up to no good and wanted to hide it, why not dump it in a river or burn it or something like that? Any thoughts on that?
Well, you're right. I mean, you would think that somebody would have try to get rid of the evidence. But there's also the other fact that, if they want to make it look like she just kind of upped and left on her own, well, then her vehicle needs to be found somewhere. Why in this parking lot of a hotel near Lambeau Field? We don't know. We can only speculate. It'd been missing for quite a long period of time, so someone made the conscious decision to make it so that it would be found again, and so that would be going on to the motive of the person who was responsible for Amber's death, because we do believe this is a homicide, even though her body's never been found. So I mean, there's a couple different theories, but making it or a vehicle appear could then leave the impression that she's still alive and she just abandoned it.
Yeah, because if it was found burnt, then you would think, okay, this is immediately foul play, and now there's some kind of ambiguity to it, to where it's that makes sense. I wanted to run through we've got a lot of points here and a lot of data that I went through, and I just want to ask you some different questions randomly. So these might be a little bit out of order, but I'll try to keep them sort of chronologically in order or whatever. But some things I wanted to ask you specifically about. So her apartment, when it was looked at or visited for the first time, was that locked up? Did it seem like there were any signs of forced entry or anything like that?
No signs of forced entry at all. It was locked up. Her father was the first one to go there and reported everything that looked normal, so to speak. There was no sign of any disturbance of any point. The neighbors were interviewed and no one reported hearing any voices or loud sounds or sounds of a disturbance coming from that apartment. So just going into the apartment itself, there was no indication of foul play.
And just following up along those lines, if you think this is possibly homicide, was there ever any attempts to do like luminol testing or anything in the apartment to see if something might have happened there?
It was searched extensively, but no luminol. And I really don't know if that technology was available to the Greenville Police Department at that time in 1998. But besides just thorough searching, there was no other testing or anything like that done at the department.
Okay. And I wanted to ask too about the cell phone. You talked a little bit about that earlier. You weren't able to do much because of the lack of, resources for phone tracking and stuff like that back then. But was there a way to tell when people called that phone? Had it been turned off? Was it going straight to voicemail? What was the situation with that?
Yeah, we could tell when she last used it, and then we could tell that people were calling her and she wasn't answering. She didn't use her cell phone extensively because it was very expensive at the time to use a cell phone. So majority of her phone calls were made, from her apartment. And yeah, there was, for cell phone technology at the time, all we got was like general locations of a tower that signals might have bounced off at. But there was indication that people had tried calling her, but there was no indication that she ever made any attempt to contact anybody after, September 23rd.
And getting back to the car too, you talked a little bit about that. I had read two different reports. One that there were 600 miles additional on the car. Another one said 900 miles. What was the status of the miles, and how were you able to determine that someone, Amber, or somebody else had driven this car for those extra miles?
Well, when they did the search of her apartment, they located receipts that she had her car serviced 2 days before she went missing. I think it was on the 21st, but I'm not real sure. And so they had the mileage of the car from that day. And then so when the vehicle was found, and comparing the mileage from that day to the mileage when the vehicle was located, I don't remember the exact number, but it was in excess of 600 miles, which she would not have put on within 2 days of driving back and forth to school in Green Bay. So there was a significant indication that that vehicle had been driven quite extensively, and it was gone for a week too. So it had been driven quite extensively during that period when it was missing.
Maybe an indication that if somebody did harm her, they drove a distance to dump her body, perhaps?
Perhaps. She had been traveling to Shawano, the city of Shawano, which is about 60 miles maybe from Green Bay. She had been traveling there in the weeks before she went missing to attempt to make contact with this the person who she believed was the father of her child. But we have no indication that since she had her vehicle serviced to when she went missing, that she actually traveled there to try to see him. And even that wouldn't really justify the extent of the miles of car. So that was one of our thoughts, was that somebody did transport it, her alive or deceased, and dumped the body and then came back. But it's always been tried to kind of really never been good to come up with a really good answer why there's always been so miles on a car. It's one of the mysteries of this case.
And I'm sorry, was it 600 or was it 900?
I don't remember.
Okay. Somewhere in there.
In excess of 600 miles.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look through my notes, but I don't recall off the top of my head.
Yeah, either way, it's a pretty substantial amount of miles. That's an interesting part of the whole case.
At one point in time, the local media got a hold of a search warrant that had been sealed, but then, I don't know if it was a couple of years later, it was unsealed, and they got a hold of that, and that mentioned, or the alleged father of her child's name, Matt Schneider's his name.
Okay, and so speaking of Matt and that search warrant, that leads me sort of into this question. The search warrant that was unsealed, what were you looking for, or what was searched, or what was intended to be searched?
I believe the warrant was in reference to searching some land that Matt's family had at the time in outside of Stevens Point, Wisconsin, I believe. I believe that's the search warrant that they were able to get a copy of after it was unsealed. Typically, you seal a warrant and then can only be sealed for like 1 to 2 years, and then becomes public record after that. And so they were able to obtain a warrant, and I believe that's the one that they did, just because we had conducted a search of this property.
Okay, and I read too that there were multiple digs done in the area of Route 29, some kind of construction project. Is that also accurate?
Yeah, there was. I think in the early 2000s, they did do some excavating in the area of Highway 29, which is the same area where Matt Schneider was working at the time. His property was actually searched twice. It was searched prior by the initial investigators in the early 2000s, and then it was searched again by myself and my partner. Not sure what year, maybe 2012, 13, 14, I'm not sure.
Now, I sort of have a question about search warrants in general. Maybe you can help clarify. So if you can't just go and get a search warrant and say, I want to search X, Y, and Z on this person. You have to have some kind of probable cause, I take it.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what probable cause you had to get these search warrants in against Matt Schneider?
A lot of it was based upon the past records of the initial investigating detectives. We know through for phone records, mostly, that there was significant contact between Matt Schneider and Amber Wilde prior to her going missing, which is contrary to what Matt told us. So we know there was significant contact between the two of them. Actually, when they did initial search of her residence, they found her diary. Her diary contained significant passages describing what she had been doing into the days up to she went missing, which included attempted contacts with Mr. Schneider. So it was based part on witness statements, phone records. They did go through her diary and then compare it to like phone records and witness statements to verify if the entries she was making in her diary did line up with like phone calls that were being made that she described, or people that she talked to, and everything was kind of sort of validated that everything in her, some of the actions she described in her diary did occur because we could tell through phone records or people, witnesses. So all that in combination just gave us our probable cause.
Like a collective of all that stuff. Okay.
Yes.
And if you can also maybe explain to listeners too, I know there was a John Doe hearing connected to this case. What exactly is that, and how does that work?
It allows the prosecution to call witnesses in front of a judge, and then the judge takes all that information and decides if there is enough probable cause to charge an individual with some sort of crime. So it allows the prosecutor to call witnesses, which were done in front of a judge in secret at the time. That's kind of long and short of what is, at least in Wisconsin.
And I know it was, maybe important to sort of be able to question people and have access to people that might have information because, if I'm not mistaken, in this case, it was alleged or theorized or whatever the right phrase might be that Matt Schneider may have had help in disposing of Amber's body. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we know he had contact with and was working closely with at least one other individual. So, he was talked to, his girlfriend at the time was talked to. Matt's fiance, I think at the time, was also interviewed. His parents were brought in for the John Doe hearings. So, it was, one theory is that he didn't do this by himself, if it was in fact Matt or anybody for that matter. So, all possibilities were explored.
And did anything relevant or helpful come from any of that? Or did it sort of leave you where you already were?
Yeah, I mean, for my purposes, when I did my initial review of the case, I read the John Doe hearing transcripts and compared a lot of that information to information that was provided earlier in the investigation by people that were interviewed, and there was conflicting information given in the John Doe as compared to what other information was provided either earlier or later if there was someone who was interviewed again. So there was conflicting information that I found to be interesting. The judge eventually decided that there was not enough to pursue charges at that time.
And what charges would you have pursued? Would it just be kidnapping, or would it be homicide? What would be the charges that you would try to pursue if you could?
I think those would be the two major ones, kidnapping and homicide. Like I said, this has never been located, but we do believe that, and the family believes this also, that, Amber is deceased. There's no way that she would have ever gone this long time period without contacting a family member or anything. So we've always investigated as a homicide.
And I know you said the FBI had also come involved in this case, and I think they did some kind of review of it back in 2017. Curious what the FBI's findings were. What did they conclude or theorize in their investigation?
Well, we did have some consultation with their behavioral science unit at one point, and I think they're agreeing with us with our potential theory of what could have happened, but they just more provided information on. There was a particular person we wanted to interview at the time, and they provided a strategy and how to interview that person. But the FBI crime lab also did do some extensive testing on the items found in the car. They did some help with downloading the contents of Amber's cell phone, which there really was nothing to download because at that time, like I said, there was no smartphones or anything like that. So that was their major help, was through consultation.
Okay. And as far as physical evidence, whatever you can discuss at least, was there any DNA or fingerprints found that might be relevant to the disappearance?
Well, there was numerous fingerprints found in her vehicle. A lot of them were, were eliminated as being Amber's and her father's. However, there was fingerprints that were not identified. As much as we could, we ran those through which is called AFIS, which is an automated fingerprint identification system, which no matches ever came about. No real full-blown DNA profile was ever been able to develop from in the car in terms of, we call it an STR profile. I think there was some partial profiles. There was some hairs. I know I sent hairs to the FBI to do mitochondrial testing, which they did, and it didn't match Amber or any of her relatives or any persons of interest we had at the time. So, but there's been no full-blown unknown, unidentified DNA profile that we're able to locate.
It's got to be frustrating because that, even if there is DNA and stuff like that in the car, it may be from previous passengers that were there, or with
exactly.
Amber knew about.
I mean, exactly. She had that car for a period of time. She transported friends, transported family members. So you're right. I mean, it was more the hope of finding a profile that would match person of interest, or even having an unknown profile that, didn't match anybody, or one of the coders that, that we could have used other technology to try to identify who that person is. But we just were not getting very lucky with DNA profiles inside the car.
Was there anything in there found that tied to Matt Schneider?
No.
Okay. So that leads me to my question now. Here it is. You're retired. The case is still active. There's been no resolution. Where does the case stand today?
Well, it's definitely still being actively investigated. In fact, there's 2 investigators in Green Bay who enthusiastically volunteered to take over the investigation and are looking at different techniques, either technology or otherwise, to see if they can further investigation. So it's still active. And I think that's a good thing too, because now you have a brand new pair of eyes to go over the case, to try to come up with other solutions to any problems that come up, or theories. So it's still very much being actively investigated.
Are there still things missing that you'd like to have, that you need answers to, that if, maybe somebody out there listening had some information that would it be helpful, what they could come forward with?
Well, whoever was responsible for Amber's death, typically over this period of time, they talk to people. People, make mentions of this or that. And initially somebody might say, they just kind of say, I don't know what they're talking about. Maybe they're mistaken, or why would they say something like that? So, if anybody has any information on anybody who might have had contact with Amber during that period of time, we would certainly like to know. We think we've covered everybody, but you never know. And certainly, if anybody ever saw her vehicle, which was not necessarily noticeable, but there was some characteristics about her car that did stand out. If anybody had seen anything or was aware of any type of information, we always are willing to listen.
And I'm curious, is there a reward active in this case?
Not presently. I know there was initially, but after the years, they ended up taking that money and putting it into a scholarship fund in Amber's name at her technical school that she went to. I don't know if that's still active, but presently there is no award money that I'm aware of.
You always hope somebody will just come forward to do the right thing, but sometimes money inspires them. But hopefully, if there is anyone out there listening that has information, they'll come forward and contact the police with whatever information they might have. It might be the thing that solves the case. I want to thank you for coming on, Dave, and enlightening us about this case and giving us some of the breakdowns of the information. It's always good when we can be joined by somebody that's investigating the case to get their perspective on it. So I appreciate you coming on.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. If you want to get early and ad-free access to new episodes of Missing Persons and help support the show in the process, please consider a subscription to our Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll get early ad-free access to not only this show, but to every other show on the AbJack network of podcasts. You can get started with a free trial by searching for AbJack Entertainment in your Apple app, and we'll include a link in the show notes. If you want to find us on social media, we're on every major platform and on YouTube. Just search for Missing Persons Podcast. We'll include links to all of our social media in our show notes, and you can also visit our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. Finally, if you're in need of a platform to discuss a missing persons case that you're connected to, feel free to reach out to us on our website. We're happy to help. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.